3 words changed everything. "I need to tell you something." But it was the way she closed the door behind her that took his breath away. David had been working at the same place for 3 years now. Every morning was pretty much the same. Wake up at 7, grab coffee from the machine downstairs, and walk 12 blocks to the office building in downtown. He worked as an architect, drawing plans for houses and buildings that would hopefully make people's lives better. At 28, David thought he had his life figured out. Work hard during the week, hit the climbing gym on weekends, maybe catch a movie with friends once in a while. 6 months ago, he'd broken up with his girlfriend after dating for 2 years. They'd grown apart slowly, like two people walking in different directions without realizing it. The breakup wasn't dramatic, just two people who realized they wanted different things. Since then, David had thrown himself into work. His desk was covered with sketches, coffee rings, and small models of buildings he was designing. His coworkers often joked that he lived at the office, but David didn't mind. Creating something from nothing felt good. Seeing empty lots turn into homes where families would make memories, that made all the long hours worth it. The office was buzzing that Tuesday morning in October. David could hear whispered conversations near the coffee machine and excited chatter from the reception area. Something was definitely happening, but he couldn't figure out what. His friend Tony from the next cubicle leaned over with a grin. "Did you hear the news? We're getting someone new." David looked up from his computer screen. "New intern?" "Nope, project coordinator. Someone really good, apparently. The boss has been talking about this person for weeks." That got David's attention. Their current project coordinator had left last month for a job in California, and everyone had been picking up extra work since then. Having someone new meant less stress for everyone. The morning staff meeting started at 9 sharp. David grabbed his notebook and coffee, settling into his usual spot near the back of the conference room. Their boss, Mr. Henderson, stood at the front with a phone on speaker. "Everyone, I want you to meet Elena Rodriguez. She'll be joining us next Monday as our new project coordinator." A clear, confident voice came through the phone speaker. "Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to work with you all. I've heard amazing things about the projects you're working on." David found himself leaning forward slightly. There was something about her voice, warm but professional, confident without being cocky. She sounded like someone who knew what she was doing. Elena continued talking about her background. 5 years managing big residential projects in Chicago. Experience with budgets, client relations, timeline management. She answered questions from the team with ease, showing she really understood the business. "I'm looking forward to meeting everyone in person on Monday," she said before the call ended. "I've already started reviewing some of your current projects, and I'm impressed with the quality of work you're doing." After the meeting, the office was alive with curiosity. David's coworker, Lisa, mentioned she'd looked Elena up online and found some articles about successful projects she'd managed. Another colleague said he'd heard she was really good at dealing with difficult clients. David tried to focus on his work, but he kept thinking about that voice. Professional but friendly, smart without being intimidating. He wondered what she was like in person. The rest of the week crawled by slowly. David found himself looking forward to Monday in a way he hadn't in months. Not just because they'd finally have help with project management, but because he was genuinely curious about this new person who would be joining their team. Friday afternoon, Mr. Henderson stopped by David's desk. "Elena will be working closely with you on the Morrison project," he said. "It's our biggest job this quarter, and I think you two will work well together." The Morrison project was huge, a community center with a theater, art gallery, and meeting spaces. It was the kind of project that could really make a difference in the neighborhood. David had been working on the initial designs for weeks, and having a skilled project coordinator would be crucial for success. That weekend, David found himself cleaning his desk and organizing his files. He told himself it was just good professional practice, but deep down he knew he wanted to make a good first impression. Saturday morning at the climbing gym, his friend Jake noticed he seemed distracted. "You okay, man? You've been staring at that wall for 5 minutes." David laughed and shook his head. "Just thinking about work stuff." "Work stuff? On a Saturday? That's not like you." David couldn't really explain it. Something about Monday felt different, like something was about to change. He'd felt this way only a few times in his life. Before starting college. Before moving to the city. before major moments that shifted everything. Sunday evening, David laid out his clothes for Monday and made sure his portfolio was organized. He reviewed the Morrison project files one more time, wanting to be prepared for whatever discussions they might have. As he got ready for bed, David looked out his apartment window at the city lights. Tomorrow would bring someone new into his routine, into his workspace, into his daily life. He had no way of knowing that this new person would completely change everything he thought he knew about himself. He fell asleep wondering what Elena would be like in person, completely unaware that in less than 12 hours, his ordinary Tuesday morning routine would be the last normal morning he'd have for a very long time. The alarm clock would ring at 7, just like always. He'd make coffee, just like always. He'd walk those same 12 blocks to the office building, just like always. But once he met Elena Rodriguez, nothing in David's carefully organized life would ever be quite the same again. Some people believe in fate. Others think everything happens by chance. David had never really thought about it much either way. But as he drifted off to sleep that Sunday night, something deep inside him knew that Monday would be special. He just had no idea how special it would turn out to be. Monday morning came with gray clouds and light rain tapping against David's bedroom window. He'd woken up 15 minutes before his alarm, which almost never happened. His mind was already racing, thinking about the day ahead and meeting the new project coordinator everyone had been talking about. David went through his usual morning routine, but everything felt different somehow. He picked out his favorite navy blue shirt instead of his regular Monday outfit. He spent an extra minute making sure his hair looked decent. Even his coffee tasted better than usual, though he couldn't figure out why. The walk to the office felt longer than normal, probably because he was paying attention to every detail. The street vendors setting up their stands, the early commuters hurrying past with their umbrellas, the familiar smell of fresh bread from the bakery on 3rd Street. David realized he'd been walking the same route for 3 years, but had stopped noticing these small things. He arrived at the office building at 8:30, earlier than his usual time. The lobby was quieter than normal, with just a few people waiting for elevators. David rode up to the 7th floor, listening to the familiar ding of each floor passing by. The office was mostly empty when he walked in. Just Amy from accounting at her desk, typing away at her computer, and the cleaning crew finishing up in the conference room. David settled at his desk and turned on his computer, but found himself looking toward the main entrance every few minutes. At 8:47, he heard the elevator doors open down the hall. Footsteps echoed in the corridor, confident but not hurried. David tried to focus on his computer screen, pulling up the Morrison project files. But his attention kept drifting toward the sounds coming from the reception area. A woman's voice, speaking quietly with Brenda at the front desk. David couldn't make out the words, but the tone was friendly and professional. This had to be Elena. After a week of wondering, she was finally here. From his desk, David could see part of the reception area if he looked up from his computer. He caught his first glimpse of her as she stood talking with Brenda, reviewing some paperwork. Dark brown hair pulled back neatly, wearing a professional gray jacket that looked both stylish and practical. She moved with a kind of quiet confidence that made people around her seem more relaxed. David found himself watching how she interacted with people. When the intern, Kevin, walked by with a stack of files, she smiled and stepped slightly aside to give him more room. When Brenda offered her coffee, Elena thanked her but mentioned she'd grab some later, not wanting to be any trouble. The morning progressed with the usual office activity. Mr. Henderson gave Elena a tour of the building, introducing her to different departments. David could hear their voices getting closer and farther as they moved through the halls. He caught glimpses of them through the glass conference room walls, Elena taking notes and asking questions about various projects. Around 10:30, David heard his name mentioned in conversation. Mr. Henderson was explaining the Morrison project to Elena, pointing toward David's desk area. David quickly looked down at his computer, pretending to be deeply focused on architectural drawings. "That's David Martinez over there," Mr. Henderson was saying. "He's our lead architect on the Morrison Community Center project. You'll be working closely with him to manage the timeline and client expectations." David looked up and gave a small wave when Elena glanced in his direction. She smiled and nodded back, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. Even from 30 feet away, David could tell she had the kind of smile that made people feel welcome. The tour continued, but David found it hard to concentrate on his work. He kept thinking about how Elena carried herself, the way she listened carefully when people spoke, how she seemed to remember everyone's names after just one introduction. Lunchtime arrived, and David was eating a sandwich at his desk while reviewing blueprint measurements. He was so focused on his work that he didn't notice someone approaching until a shadow fell across his papers. "Excuse me, are you David?" He looked up to find Elena standing beside his desk, holding a tablet and looking slightly uncertain for the first time since he'd seen her that morning. "Yes, that's me," David said, quickly swallowing his bite of sandwich and standing up. "I'm Elena Rodriguez. Mr. Henderson said I should introduce myself since we'll be working together on the Morrison project." Up close, David could see that Elena's eyes were warm brown with small flecks of amber. She was shorter than he'd expected, maybe 5 feet 4 inches, but she had a presence that made her seem taller. Her handshake was firm and confident. "It's really nice to meet you," David said, hoping his voice sounded normal. "I've been looking forward to having someone help manage this project." "It's pretty big." Elena's face lit up with interest. "I've been reading through the project files. A community theater, art gallery, and meeting spaces all in one building? That sounds amazing. What made you choose that particular design approach?" David blinked, surprised by the question. Most people asked about budgets or timelines first, not design philosophy. Well, the community wanted spaces that could serve different purposes but still feel connected. The idea is that someone could attend a meeting, grab coffee, and see art all in the same visit. "That makes perfect sense," Elena said, nodding thoughtfully. "Building community connections through the physical space itself. I love that approach." They talked for another 10 minutes about the project goals and client expectations. Elena asked smart questions about accessibility requirements, parking needs, and how the different spaces would flow together. David found himself getting excited about the project in a way he hadn't felt in weeks. "I'd love to see the preliminary drawings sometime," Elena said. "Maybe we could schedule some time this week to go through everything in detail?" "Absolutely," David replied. "How about Wednesday afternoon? I'll have the latest revisions ready by then." "Perfect. I'll put it on my calendar." As Elena walked back toward her new desk, David realized he was smiling for no particular reason. For the first time in months, he felt genuinely excited about coming to work. Not just because the Morrison project was interesting, but because he'd be working with someone who seemed to understand what made architecture meaningful. The rest of Monday passed quickly. David caught himself glancing toward Elena's desk area occasionally, watching how she organized her workspace and interacted with their co-workers. She had a way of making everyone feel heard, whether it was Kevin asking about project deadlines or Amy explaining the office filing system. By 5 o'clock, David realized he was actually looking forward to Tuesday, and Wednesday, and the rest of the week. For the first time since his breakup 6 months ago, work felt like more than just a way to pass time. As David packed up his things to leave, he noticed Elena was still at her desk, reading through project files with complete concentration. He thought about saying goodbye but decided not to interrupt her focus. There would be plenty of time to talk tomorrow. Walking home through the city streets, David found himself paying attention to the architecture around him in a way he hadn't in months. The way light fell across building facades, how different structures created unique shadows, the relationship between old and new construction. Everything seemed more interesting, more worth noticing. He had no way of knowing that Elena was having similar thoughts about her first day, or that she'd already decided David seemed like exactly the kind of person she'd hoped to work with. All David knew was that Monday had turned out better than expected, and he couldn't wait to see what Tuesday would bring. The Morrison Community Center presentation was scheduled for Friday at 2 in the afternoon. This wasn't just any ordinary client meeting, it was the big one, the one that would determine whether their design concept would move forward, or if they'd need to start over from scratch. David had been thinking about this presentation for weeks, but now, with less than 24 hours to go, he felt completely unprepared. Thursday morning started with Murphy's Law in full effect. The printer in their office broke down right when David needed to print the final blueprints. The presentation slides that had looked perfect on his computer screen somehow appeared blurry when projected on the conference room wall. Even his lucky coffee mug, the blue one he'd used for every important meeting in the past 3 years, had somehow developed a crack down the middle. Elena arrived at the office that morning wearing a burgundy dress that made her look both professional and confident. She took one look at David's stressed expression and immediately switched into problem-solving mode. "Okay, what's going wrong?" she asked, setting her bag down and rolling up her sleeves like she was ready for battle. David explained about the printer, the slides, and his general feeling that everything was falling apart at the worst possible moment. Elena listened without interrupting, then started making a list of solutions. "The print shop on 5th Street can handle the blueprints," she said. "I'll call them right now. For the slides, we just need to adjust the resolution. And about your coffee mug," she paused and smiled. "I think we can work around that particular crisis." By noon, Elena had solved the printing problem, fixed the slide presentation, and even found a replacement coffee mug that was almost identical to David's broken one. But despite her efficiency, David could tell she was feeling the pressure too. She'd been unusually quiet during their morning meeting, and he'd caught her staring out the window several times, lost in thought. "Are you okay?" David asked as they grabbed lunch from the deli downstairs. Elena hesitated before answering. "I've managed a lot of project presentations, but this one feels different. Maybe because we've put so much of ourselves into it." David knew exactly what she meant. The Morrison project wasn't just another job for either of them. It represented everything they believed about creating spaces that brought communities together. If the client rejected their proposal, it wouldn't just be a professional disappointment. It would feel personal. They spent the afternoon doing final preparations. Elena organized all their materials with military precision, while David practiced his presentation one more time. By 6 o'clock, everything was ready for tomorrow's meeting. The office had emptied out, leaving just the two of them surrounded by poster boards, sample materials, and carefully organized presentation folders. "I think we should call it a day," Elena said, looking at the conference room that had become their war room. "We've done everything we can do." David nodded, but neither of them made any move to leave. There was something about the quiet office, the warm light from the desk lamps, and the sense of shared accomplishment that made the moment feel significant. Elena had changed out of her burgundy dress and into a soft cream sweater and jeans. Her hair, which had been professionally styled that morning, was now loosely pulled back with a few strands framing her face. She looked relaxed for the first time all day, and David found himself thinking that this was how he preferred to see her, natural and unguarded. "You know," Elena said, settling back into her chair and looking around at their work, "I've been thinking about what makes a good partnership." David looked up from the presentation notes he'd been reviewing for the 10th time. "What do you mean?" "In project management, you work with a lot of different people. Architects, contractors, clients, city planners. Most of the time, it's just professional collaboration. Everyone does their job, and hopefully the project succeeds." Elena paused, choosing her words carefully. "But sometimes you find someone who thinks the way you think, who cares about the same things you care about. Someone who makes you better at your job just by being around." David felt his heart speed up slightly. "Is that what you think we have?" Elena met his eyes directly. "I think we have something pretty special, David. This project, the way we work together. I've never experienced anything quite like it." The conference room felt suddenly smaller, more intimate. David was aware of how quiet the office was around them, how the city lights were starting to twinkle outside the windows, how Elena was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Elena," he started, then stopped. He wanted to tell her how he felt, how working with her had changed everything about his job, how he looked forward to seeing her every morning and missed her on weekends. But the words seemed too big, too risky. "I should probably head home," Elena said softly, though she didn't move from her chair. "Big day tomorrow." "Right," David agreed. "We should both get some rest." But neither of them stood up. They sat there in the warm circle of light from the conference room lamps, surrounded by the evidence of weeks of collaboration and creativity. The presentation materials that represented their shared vision, the coffee cups that marked all their late-night planning sessions, the sketches and notes that showed how their individual ideas had merged into something neither could have created alone. David realized this might be his only chance to say something before tomorrow changed everything. Win or lose, after the Morrison presentation, their working relationship would shift. If they won the project, there would be months of construction management ahead. If they lost, they'd move on to other assignments, other partnerships. Elena, he said again, and this time his voice was steadier. I need to tell you something. She looked at him with those warm brown eyes that had become so familiar, so important to his daily happiness. What is it? David took a deep breath, feeling like he was about to jump off a cliff without knowing if there was water below. Working with you these past few months has been the best part of my job. Not just because you're good at what you do, though you are, but because, he paused, searching for the right words, because you make me want to be better. At my work, at communicating, at everything. Elena's expression grew softer, more thoughtful. David, I know this complicates things, he continued, the words coming faster now. I know we work together, and that makes everything more difficult. But I can't pretend I don't feel something here. Something more than just professional respect. The silence that followed felt endless. David could hear the distant sound of traffic from the street below, the hum of the building's ventilation system, his own heartbeat in his ears. Elena was looking down at her hands, and he couldn't tell if she was upset, surprised, or something else entirely. Finally, she looked up at him. You think I don't feel it too? David's breath caught. Do you? Elena stood up slowly, walking to the conference room windows that overlooked the city. Her reflection was visible in the dark glass, and David could see she was thinking carefully about her next words. I've been trying so hard to keep this professional, she said without turning around, to focus on the work, to maintain appropriate boundaries. But yes, David, I feel it too. David stood up as well, his heart pounding so hard he was sure Elena could hear it across the room. So what do we do about it? Elena turned around to face him, leaning against the window. I don't know. I've never been in this situation before. I've never felt this way about someone I work with. Neither have I, David admitted. They stood there looking at each other across the conference room, two people who had found something unexpected in the most ordinary of places. The presentation material scattered across the table seemed to represent more than just a work project now. They were evidence of a connection that had grown from professional collaboration into something deeper, more personal, more risky. Tomorrow's going to be crazy, Elena said. The presentation, the client meeting, all of it. Yeah, David agreed. Maybe we should focus on that first. Get through tomorrow. See how the presentation goes. David nodded, though part of him wanted to cross the room and tell Elena exactly how he felt about her, work complications and all. But she was right. Tomorrow was too important to both of them professionally. Elena gathered her things slowly, as if she was reluctant to leave. At the conference room door, she paused with her hand on the light switch. David, she said, for what it's worth, I'm glad you said something. I was starting to think I was imagining this whole thing. You weren't imagining it, David said quietly. Elena smiled, the first completely unguarded smile he'd seen from her all day. Good night, David. We're going to do great tomorrow. Good night, Elena. She turned off the lights and left, her footsteps echoing down the empty hallway toward the elevators. David stood alone in the dark conference room for several minutes, looking out at the city lights and thinking about everything that had just changed between them. Tomorrow they would present their vision for the Morrison Community Center. But tonight, David knew that regardless of how the presentation went, his relationship with Elena had shifted into completely new territory. The question was whether she was ready to explore that territory with him, or if they would both decide it was too risky to pursue. As David finally gathered his things and headed toward the Friday morning arrived with bright sunshine streaming through David's apartment windows, a complete contrast to his nervous energy. He'd barely slept, running through presentation scenarios in his mind all night. Every possible question the client might ask, every detail that could go wrong, every reason why their design might not be chosen. David arrived at the office an hour early, wanting to review everything one final time. The conference room where they'd spent so many late nights working looked different in the morning light. Cleaner, more formal, ready for the most important meeting of their careers. Elena walked in at 9:30, looking perfectly put together in a navy blue suit that conveyed both professionalism and confidence. But David could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she checked and rechecked her presentation notes even though they both knew every detail by heart. Ready for this? She asked, setting down her coffee and reviewing their materials one last time. As ready as we'll ever be, David replied, though his stomach was doing somersaults. The morning crawled by slowly. David tried to focus on other work, but his mind kept drifting to the presentation. At noon, Elena suggested they grab lunch, but neither of them had much appetite. They sat in the break room picking at sandwiches and going over their talking points again. At 1:30, the clients arrived. Mr. Henderson greeted them in the lobby while David and Elena did final preparations in the conference room. David could hear voices and laughter echoing down the hallway, but couldn't make out individual words. "This is it," Elena said, straightening her jacket and taking a deep breath. The presentation went better than David had dared to hope. The clients asked thoughtful questions about accessibility, community programming, and long-term maintenance. They seemed genuinely excited about the theater design and impressed by Elena's detailed timeline for construction phases. When David explained how natural light would move through the gallery spaces during different seasons, he saw several committee members nodding with approval. By 4 o'clock, they'd covered every aspect of the project. The clients thanked them for their thorough work and said they'd have a decision by early next week. Handshakes were exchanged, business cards collected, and promises made to stay in touch regardless of the outcome. After the clients left, the office felt strangely quiet. David and Elena stood in the conference room, surrounded by presentation materials and the lingering energy of everything they'd just accomplished. "That went really well," Elena said, but her voice sounded distant. "Yeah, I think so too," David agreed. "Your section about community partnerships was perfect. I could see them getting excited about the possibilities." They began cleaning up the conference room, carefully organizing sketches and putting away poster boards. The routine task felt oddly calming after hours of nervous energy. David found himself moving slowly, not wanting this moment to end. "So now we wait," Elena said, folding up the last of their presentation materials. "Now we wait," David confirmed. The office around them was winding down for the week. David could hear coworkers saying goodbye in the hallway, elevator doors opening and closing, the gradual quieting that marked the end of another Friday. Soon it would be just the two of them, like so many evenings before. Elena gathered her purse and jacket, checking to make sure she hadn't forgotten anything. "I should probably head home." "It's been a long week." David nodded, understanding completely. They'd both been running on nervous energy for days, and the emotional exhaustion was finally catching up. "Get some rest. You've earned it." But as Elena reached the conference room door, she stopped. Her hand rested on the doorknob for a long moment, and David could see her shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath. Something was clearly on her mind. "David," she said without turning around. "Yeah?" Another pause, longer this time. Elena's hand was still on the doorknob, but she hadn't turned it. David waited, sensing that whatever she was about to say was important. Slowly, deliberately, Elena turned the lock on the conference room door. The soft click echoed in the quiet space, final and full of intention. David's heart began beating faster as he realized what was happening. Elena turned around to face him, and when their eyes met, David saw something that made his breath catch. The professional mask she'd worn all day was gone, replaced by something vulnerable and real and hopeful. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. Elena walked back toward him, each step careful and purposeful. "All day today, during the presentation, afterward with the clients, I kept thinking about what you said last night." She stopped about 3 feet away from him, close enough that David could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, close enough to notice that her hands were trembling slightly. "I've been trying so hard to keep this professional," Elena continued, "to focus on the work, to maintain appropriate boundaries. But sitting in that presentation today, watching you explain your vision for the community center, seeing how much you care about creating something meaningful." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I realized I don't want to keep pretending this is just about work anymore." David felt like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. "Elena, I know this changes everything," she said quickly, as if she needed to get all the words out before she lost her nerve. "I know it complicates our working relationship, and I know there are no guarantees about how this turns out. But I also know that I've never felt this way about someone I work with, and I couldn't leave tonight without telling you." The conference room felt completely different now, smaller, more intimate, filled with possibility and risk in equal measure. David could hear his own heartbeat, could smell Elena's perfume mixed with the lingering scent of coffee and the stress of their long day. "I've been thinking the same thing," David said. his voice barely above a whisper. All week, all month, really. Trying to figure out how to balance what I feel for you with keeping things professional. Elena smiled then, a real smile that transformed her entire face. And what do you feel for me? David stepped closer, close enough to see the way her eyes reflected the conference room lights, close enough to notice the small scar on her chin that he'd never seen before. I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to meet someone like you, he said honestly. Someone who understands what I'm trying to create, who makes me want to be better at everything I do. Someone who makes coming to work feel like the best part of my day. Elena's smile grew wider. Even on days when I'm stressed about deadlines and probably not very pleasant to be around? Especially on those days, David said, making her laugh. They stood there for a moment, looking at each other in the soft light filtering through the conference room windows. The city was spread out below them, millions of people going about their Friday evening routines, completely unaware that two people 7 floors up were having the most important conversation of their lives. So what happens now? Elena asked. I don't know, David admitted. I've never been in this situation before. I've never cared about someone I work with this much. Neither have I, Elena said. But I know I don't want to pretend anymore that this is just about architecture and project management. David reached out slowly, giving Elena every chance to step away if she wanted to. When she didn't move, he gently took her hand. Her fingers were warm and soft, and he could feel her pulse beating rapidly against his thumb. Are you sure about this? He asked. Because once we cross this line, there's no going back to just being co-workers. Elena looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. I'm terrified, she said honestly. But I'm also more sure about this than I've been about anything in a long time. David felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying for weeks. Me too. The space between them seemed to shrink without either of them moving. David became aware of everything, the way Elena was looking at him, the sound of rain beginning to tap against the windows, the fact that they were completely alone in their own small world. Elena, he said softly. Yeah? I'm really glad you closed that door. She laughed, a sound full of relief and happiness and nervous energy. I almost didn't. I almost just said goodnight and left, and then spent the whole weekend wondering what might have happened if I'd been braver. I'm glad you were brave, David said. When David kissed her for the first time, it felt like everything in his carefully organized life suddenly made perfect sense. The late nights working on projects, the shared lunches, the gradual realization that he looked forward to seeing Elena more than anything else in his day. It all led to this moment in a quiet conference room with rain painting patterns on the windows. When they finally broke apart, Elena rested her forehead against his. This is definitely going to complicate things at work, she said with a smile. Probably, David agreed. But some complications are worth it. Elena looked around the conference room where they'd spent so many hours planning and dreaming and building something together. You know what's funny? I think our best work happens when we're being completely honest with each other. Then we should probably keep being honest, David said. Elena nodded, her hand still in his. Starting right now. As they stood there together, surrounded by the evidence of their professional partnership and the